welcome everybody who's joining this webinar, which we're really excited to have. I'm really sorry, we were trying to get some music to make it more fun as you came in to join the webinar, but sadly we haven't been able to make that work. But next time we'll have some music to get everyone dancing before sitting down for the webinar. So we'll just give people a few more minutes to join. And once we think most participants are there, in just a minute or two, I'll kick off. And I know we've got such a fantastic panel. We're so lucky that hopefully we're really looking forward to hearing what everyone has to say and to hearing the questions and the comments from participants as you come in. We really look forward to all of that. And we'll give it another minute for everybody to arrive. And then we will get started, everyone, with this webinar. Just checking whether how many people are still coming in or whether we get going. But I think it's probably time to get going, because we want to respect your time. And I'm delighted that Agamemnon Atera, who's one of the participants and is a trustee of Ashden, has offered to sing. But I think sadly we've missed our moment, Aga, so next time I'm going to take you up on that offer, which would have been really fun to have had your singing as the music to come in. But can I say welcome everybody to this webinar being run by Ashden. I'm Harriet Lamb, I lead Ashden, and we're famous for the prestigious awards which we run that seek to put the spotlight on climate pioneers and the solutions that those pioneers are running and that we need to scale and to replicate if we're going to solve the climate crisis and indeed climate injustice as well. I'd like to really thank DOEN and Ssempijja Foundation, who last year enabled us to run our first ever Ashden Award for Regenerative Agriculture. So enabling this webinar to take place, because obviously out of the awards, we always then seek to take the learning from that process and to share that. And we've got an absolutely all-star lineup for you on the panel today, with a really amazing group of people who I'm really looking forward to chatting with them over the coming hour, and of course bringing in all your comments from the audience. We'll kick off with two longer keynote contributions from Adele and Noah, and then I'll ask a question to each of the panel who more or less work right across the globe, and then we'll take in your questions from the chat. So please do keep your questions coming. And also please do feel free to tweet. I should say we are recording the webinar, and we know that many people wanted to join and were unable to, so we'll obviously be putting that on YouTube channel afterwards and on our own website. But do also please feel free to talk about this on social media as well, because one of the things we want to do is to put the spotlight onto regenerative agriculture and the solutions that that offers to the climate crisis. One of the questions people always ask in webinars like this is, well, what impact has COVID had? And I have to say, COVID has had an impact on our panel today, as you perhaps might expect. We're very happy that Adele Jones from the Sustainable Food Trust has made it today. She's very kindly come with her cough sweets to the ready, because she has been hit by COVID, but has decided she's feeling just about well enough to croak her way through the next 1 hour. I'm very sorry to say that on the other hand, Felipe Villela from reNature, who was going to join us, is unfortunately feeling just too hit by COVID and had to pull out this morning. So we'll miss him, but thank you to everyone else for making it, and in particular for Adele for struggling on. So, and welcome to all the panelists, to all the participants as well. I'm thrilled to see we have people from right across the world and from really different backgrounds. We have people from the world of finance and funding through to supply chains, through to people working with farmers. So a really fantastic wealth of experience in the audience as well. And do please follow William's lead and introduce yourself in the chat to the other participants. So let's crack on then with our first keynote speaker, Adele. And Adele's really going to give us the take of the Sustainable Food Trust on the whole question of what is regenerative agriculture. I think we've all heard these words about regenerative agriculture, organic agroecology, climate smart agriculture. And really, Adele's going to help guide us through that, about what do the different terms mean and explain their benefits for the climate. So Adele, over to you.
Thank you very much, Harriet, and to the whole Ashden team for pulling this really rich webinar together. I'm really delighted and honoured to be part of the panel here. And I do apologise for being a little croaky. We'll probably get croakier throughout my presentation, but I have to say I sound worse than I feel. Thankfully, I have been hit by COVID, but not too badly. So yeah, apologies for the slightly hoarse voice, but I'm going to provide a bit of an overview summary of regenerative agriculture from our perspective at the Sustainable Food Trust. And just to introduce myself, I'm Adele. I'm Deputy Chief Executive of the Sustainable Food Trust. And if we can just go to the next slide. We are a small UK-based organisation, a charity here. We're about 10 years old. We were founded by a man called Patrick Holden, who many of you might be aware of. He's a very prominent voice in this field. And our mission is to accelerate the transition towards more sustainable food and farming on a global scale. And we like to do that by understanding what the barriers are which currently exist, which are preventing a much more mainstream transition to sustainable regenerative agriculture taking place. Obviously, one of those barriers is financial. At the moment, the best business case is to produce food, on as much as possible for as low as possible cost. But what we're now understanding is that actually there is a very significant cost to producing food in that more intensive way, to the environment, to public health, to well-being. And actually it's those costs which we now really need to be thinking about kind of integrating and putting front and center of our decision making when it comes to sustainable agriculture. So if we can go to the next slide, please. So just to start off, I mean, I think we're all aware now that agriculture is part of the problem for climate, for nature, for health. There's obviously different figures out there which highlight, give you a slightly different perspective on how much of a problem agriculture is. But, the basic is agriculture is a problem. It is having significant impact on climate, obviously through emissions. We're also degrading nature very rapidly on a global scale. And at the same time, we have this bizarre situation arising where there's half the kind of global population obese and half the global population malnourished. That's a kind of overgeneralization, but it's kind of the direction we're going. And so something's not right. We have to fix food for these reasons. So why is it? What is the difference between where we are now with our more intensive food systems? And I'm not saying this is all of agriculture, because of course, particularly in countries with lots of smallholder farmers, there's some amazing things going on, and we need to think about how to scale those up. But what's going wrong now with industrial agriculture? So if we can please go to the next slide. So, sorry, this is a really kind of blurry and not very clear diagram, but basically, industrial agriculture is based on a linear system. We have inputs coming in, that's things like fertilizer, feed, pesticides, etc., energy, fossil fuels, obviously, to power machinery and whatnot. And then we have stuff coming out, food products, commodity crops, livestock products. But those, it's a linear system. There's not very much being recycled in terms of nutrients on the farm. And actually, there's a lot of hidden costs, as I mentioned before: greenhouse gases, pollution, poor animal welfare, poor working and living environments for the people working on those farms. So it's a linear system with lots coming in, lots going out, but there's a huge amount of hidden costs that we really, really need to be thinking about how we change. So going on to the next slide. This again is a not very clear diagram, but it shows the difference between that model, which is very linear, and this model, this regenerative model, which is much more circular in nature. So you can see here that there's some inputs coming in, hopefully very minimal, in terms of, you know, some energy that's obviously going to be required to power some machinery and whatnot. And there's food coming out still, but there's a whole lot of circularity in terms of nutrients that are being recycled, soil fertility, which is being built as a result of the food production systems, which is being recycled back. And the impact on climate change, the impact on nature, and the impact on public health is much, much lower. So if we can go to the next slide, you can see more clearly the difference between these two when you sit them side by side. Going from a linear system to a circular system is what we believe to be core to the difference between the industrial kind of systems for producing food and then the alternative regenerative agriculture. And we feel really strongly that by switching to these systems and understanding what's needed to help farmers switch to these systems, is it finance, is it expertise, is it signals coming from the market that consumers are wanting this different type of food? It's probably all of those things bundled together. So we need to think about how we can shift from this red model to this green model in a way which really helps farmers create a strong business case and produce food, which they're then able to kind of sell the story as well as the food, which is really, really important. So if we can just go to the next slide. So to kind of sum that up, from a sustainable food trust perspective, we think there are three key principles that underpin regenerative agriculture. Firstly, farming in harmony with nature. We feel really, really strongly that farming and biodiversity, nature, should not be seen as two separate entities. They should be one and indivisible. And actually, if you think about it, the Prince of Wales always says we are nature. We shouldn't be seen as separate. We shouldn't think of ourselves as separate from it. So why should we produce food in a way which marginalizes nature to the sides of the fields? We're starting to think now about, over the last 20 or 30 years, at least, thinking about it from a UK perspective, we've done quite well in, things like replanting some hedgerows and ponds and wildlife reserves, which is all very well, but it's really marginal stuff. What we want to be thinking about now is bringing nature right back into the middle of fields and farming in a way which regenerates nature at the very heart of food production, rather than, let's produce food here, over there, let's produce food here and have nature over there. I think we really need to move away from that mindset of land sparing, we call it, towards more of a land sharing approach. The second, as I was talking about before, is the principle of the circular economy. So trying to minimize the amount of external input that's coming into the system and thinking more about recycling those nutrients, soil fertility, and everything else that is incorporated into the system. So it's more of a closed loop. And the third principle is positive health. Producing food in this regenerative way should genuinely, be positive for things like soil fertility, for animal welfare, as well as the people who are working on the farm. So we really need to be thinking about how we're producing food in a way which regenerates rather than degenerates our landscape and our people. But I wanted to sort of caveat these sort of principles of regenerative agriculture slightly, because Harriet, as you alluded to a moment ago, there's a lot of confusion about terms. I personally really like this word, regenerative agriculture. I think it describes really nicely what we need to do. But there's a dispute going on, terminology turf war, you could say, about what is the right word we should be using to describe these type of farms that we need to be transitioning to. Is it regenerative? Is it agroecological? Is it climate smart agriculture, nature friendly farming? You could go on and on and on with the lists of terms that different people use. And actually, whilst we generally support the term regenerative agriculture, we are trying to move towards more of an outcome-based approach when thinking about this transition that needs to take place. So if we can go to the next slide, please. So this is a project we're working on at the Sustainable Food Trust. I mentioned barriers to change right at the beginning, and we see one of the barriers to change which is currently preventing this transition being the lack of a common set of metrics for measuring and reporting on farm sustainability. And this is a project we started sort of 6 or so years ago, with farmers being fed up basically with the amount of audits they're having to do on farm. That was 6 years ago. You know, now there's even more in terms of different requirements that farmers are subjected to, whether it's carbon footprinting, certification, regulatory compliance, applications to get their subsidies, whatever it might be. They're required to do all these different audits each year. And actually, when we looked at them, they all overlapped, and B, none of them were actually helping the farmers understand how they could make incremental transitions to being better year on year. So we put the challenge back to the farmers and we said, look, what do you guys think is important to be measuring and telling citizens about who are eating your food? And they came up with this framework. It's obviously evolved quite a lot over the last 6 years, but rather than reinventing the wheel, ironically, you can see a wheel here on the screen. We haven't reinvented the wheel. This is a wheel that's made up of a whole load of other wheels. We've tried to take the best bits of metric frameworks that exist currently and bring them together and bring the people together to really collaborate on what these common metrics should be. And as you can see here, there's 11 categories of assessment, and there's indicators under there's 3 key indicators under these 11, and then there's measures which feed into those. But this framework can really help, firstly, and most importantly, farmers understand the spectrum of sustainability that they sit on, and from that, you know, how they can take steps year on year. It's not a binary framework. It's not you have to be this to get the gold star. It's a framework which you kind of climb the stairway to heaven on. But there's also many other uses.
Thanks so much, Adele. If we could perhaps, if you'd just like to wrap up now.
Yeah, sure. Okay, yeah, no problem. So just back to the final point I wanted to make on this is that when you look at outcomes, for example, soil health, water quality, biodiversity, energy and resource use, nutrient management, we can all agree that we need to move towards doing better in each of these areas. So actually it takes away the kind of debate about terms, regenerative agroecology. If we can all agree we need to move forward on these outcomes, we can all get to that same end place. So that's the approach we're taking on this now, but hopefully that's given you a bit of an overview about regenerative agriculture, and I look forward to the discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Adele. That was so clear, and I'm sure people will be asking and will want to see your PowerPoint slides after, so we will be sure to send them round to all participants. I think they were really helpful in guiding us through that. And so, holding those thoughts, we thought it'd be now fantastic to travel to Uganda, where we're absolutely delighted to have a chance to hear from Noah Ssempijja, who I congratulate again on winning the Ashden Award for Regenerative Agriculture in 2021. And we're first going to see a film, the film about the award which they won, and then Noah's going to talk us through some of the challenges and the issues, and indeed the successes that they are achieving in Uganda. So let's watch the film.
My respect for the planet all started at home with my mother. She would remind us how those who lived before us left the plants and fruits that we ate. She showed us that the birds are important and the trees are important too. Next to our home, we had a forest where we would gather firewood. We would go there, and there were lots of birds, monkeys, and other animals. We would take time to sing with the birds. They would respond. As children, that was a very beautiful feeling. Then, the forest was cut. Why did you cut our friends? It was the saddest moment. The villagers tried to oppose the cutting, but there was a rich man who had bought it and was much more powerful. So, this story has been played out many times in Uganda. We don't have enough food to eat. We don't have income. Women and the young people are the most affected. They don't have access to capital. Can we motivate them, train them to create a new lifestyle for themselves? My name is Ssempijja. I founded YICE. We focus on encouraging people, mainly women, young people, and refugees, to move away from destructive farming methods to more organic and sustainable practices. Through our training, people move towards food security and earning an income from small patches of land while protecting our soil and the birds and nature around us. We understand that sometimes farmers lack the knowledge and skills about climate change, and so they are not able to prepare for it. They are not able to do the right things. So we have taken it up to us that in all the trainings that we carry out, we try to make sure that we talk about climate change, how they can manage it, how they can control it. Because we have seen that our farmers have been affected by climate change, we have introduced a mobile drip irrigation kit, which helps to, irrigate farmers' crops during the dry seasons, and they're able to plant their vegetables throughout the season. It's time to face up to it. The way we have been farming and treating our land is destroying our soils and our communities. When we share traditional farming tips amongst communities, biodiversity is up, people's production is up, and children have access to nutritious food. We have got to learn to live with each other. As my mother would say, let's think about those that come after and those that have come before us. If we don't leave it for them to enjoy, there is no meaning of life. How will they survive?
Hey, hello, can you hear me?
We can hear you fantastically. Congratulations, Noah, on that, all your wonderful work. It's very moving every time to watch it.
Thank you so much, Harriet. And I think I would just want to add a few words to that. One, I would like to confess that before we actually went into regenerative agriculture, we were doing what Adele was talking about, promoting conventional farming, which we thought after like 3 years wasn't working because the costs for buying fertilizers for the farmers were getting so high, and farmers would not, get enough yields. And after a certain time, we thought probably that wasn't the right approach. So we had to sit, think, and research of which would be the right thing to do for us. And then we went through regenerative farming, and we are happy to report that it has really worked for us, and it has worked for the farmers. Yeah, next slide, please. But then for us to make sure that regenerative farming is adopted and it's understood by the farmers, we had to think of the right approach. Working with smallholder farmers is not and is a task sometimes, because you've got to approach them from, you've got to make sure that they appreciate whatever that you're introducing to them and they are part of it. So we have a 4 kind of step approach, which starts with organizing farmers into small groups. And then, when we bring them together, we are able to talk to them as a group and convince them as groups, because it's easier for them to share experiences of what has worked and what has not worked. And then we introduce regenerative farming, and this is hands-on. because we do it from the fields of the farmers themselves, and then we make sure that the farmers we set up like demo gardens and make sure that we're guiding the farmers. And the last thing is adoption, because we need follow-up. We need to make sure that the farmers are putting into practice every tip that they have learned. And of course, lastly, we do celebrate. We see people selling vegetables. We see children getting nutritious foods and enjoying. And we add a lot of other services like regenerative farming, dairies, and monitoring and stuff like that. But now, some of the achievements, of course, one thing we've really taken forward is soil regeneration is equal to increased yields and soil productivity. And I think Adele talked about this. In the first image, our organic fertilizer that we taught farmers to make. And then in the second one, they are very nice looking vegetables that have we planted and we have applied the organic fertilizers. And this is helping farmers increase their yields. Next slide, please. So on my last slide, of course, I just wanted to share with you two things. One, what we've achieved. Of course, we've seen increase in farmers' incomes. And the first image, you can see them selling the vegetables. And then we have also seen increase in food security. Farmers are able to have enough food in their households. But also, key is climate adaptation to climate change. Uganda is one of the countries that is always hit hard by dry spells, and our farmers are able to plant their vegetables, their crops through the season. And last one is social capital, because we put farmers into groups, they are able to work together, they are able to share knowledge, they are able to share skills, and also able to do things such as saving. And yeah, we've learned a lot. Last slide, please. By doing all this, we've learned a lot of things which I thought would be key for me to share with you. The first one is mindset change. If you are to introduce regeneration or regenerative farming, you've got to invest a lot of mindset change. And this is where we put a lot of our time. It takes a lot of time for us to show farmers that you can move away from the conventional farming practices and get exactly the same yields, so even more yields, sustainably by applying regenerative farming. And this is what we've really invested a lot of our time into. And of course, the power of community organizing. The more the farmers come together, the more the message gets more clearer, the more they are able to share, the more they are able to motivate each other to implement the new technologies that we're introducing. And of course, lastly, what we've learned is about the small investments that we all make. We have, I think, a very small budget, barely 50,000 USD per year, but we have been able to reach over 1,500 households, close to 4,500 smallholder farmers that we've impacted. And also we've been able to, to create tangible change. That currently they're implementing a project in the refugee settlement in Uganda, and the government has come out to appreciate that, you can actually implement regenerative farming for refugees, and they will be having sustainable food, and we're helping them not to depend on aid a lot. And we also now in talks with World Food Program Secret that we can scale our work that we're doing for the refugees. Yeah, so that's basically about what we do. I'm happy to answer any questions, and if there are any follow-up, I'll be happy to talk to you. Thank you so much, and yeah, happy to look forward to the questions.
Thanks so much, Noah. That was so inspiring and wonderful to hear, to go from the principles that Adele was talking about down to putting those in practice, and as you said, taking the community with you and organizing the community. And indeed, do please put any comments or questions in the chat, because we'll come to those in a minute. But first, I'm thrilled to introduce our panelists who are joining us today. And on our whirlwind tour, we're now going off to India. And I'm absolutely delighted to introduce Usha Devi Venkatachalam at Krishi Janani, who were one of the finalists of the Ashden Award for their agri-tech work marketplace, which is working with smallholder organic farmers in South India in particular. So Usha, it's really interesting, because I think when people think about regenerative agriculture, they often think about it being low tech somehow. That's sort of what immediately jumps to mind. It's the opposite of using high tech. And yet you're using technology to scale organic. So can you tell us a bit about how that's working?
Sure, thank you. I hope you can hear me.
Perfectly.
Okay, great. Hello, everyone. Happy to be here, and especially happy to be seeing such an inspiring presentation. Thank you, Ashden, for putting all of this together. To sort of go back to technology, I think after having experienced it for almost 4 to 6 years now, 4 or 5 years, regenerative agriculture, regenerative agroecology is one of the most cutting edge technologies there is. Right? I think I am a technologist. I used to be a software engineer. And so, of course, we all, as soon as we think of technology, we think of computers and internet and all of that. But after having seen soil change because of regenerative practices, I feel like even technology that we see, social networks connecting millions of people and all that, is actually low tech, in my opinion. And that's a technologist's opinion. And what we are building is what we have found in India, as all of you know, India has millions and millions of small farmers. And what we have found is that there are pockets of regenerative organic farmers who are taking good care of their soil. But the problem has been that then there is no economic reward for being organic. Right? So a consumer may be buying organic in a city, but it's not the farmer who's actually getting that price premium. So what we are building is a marketplace that connects farmers who already are practicing organic, ensuring that they get the economic benefit by directly connecting them to consumers. So what our theory of change is that more farmers really want to transition, but they see these farmers and they say, oh, it's not working so much. So it's not different from me in terms of economics because we both are selling to the same trader for the same price, right? So we are enabling transition with the technology platform that we are building. And that platform has 3 components. One is a local language mobile app where farmers can help build a peer-driven knowledge library to sort of help other farmers transition. But the bigger part is the first mile connector, which are youth who help farmers get onto this mobile app and use the marketplace. And the last mile connectors are women, we call them Analakshmis, who are taking these farmers' products to consumers' houses directly. Right? So by creating an efficient sort of food value chain, we are bringing more of the economic benefits to the farmers, right? And so with technology particularly, it's really easy to say, oh, technology will solve all problems and is going to save the world by helping farmers transition to regenerative agriculture. It will not, right? The challenge is how do we use technology, right? So the easier part will be, say, for us to build an e-commerce marketplace and ask consumers to buy things from our e-commerce marketplace, right? So for us, we are taking the more challenging, more complex way of building sort of the first mile connectors and last mile connectors so that the economic benefits are distributed among the community as well, which, you know, for us to build a local, regional food, thriving, sustainable food marketplace, it needs people's involvement, it needs community involvement, and it needs economic benefits to be shared among all of us. And that is somewhat a short version of what we are building.
Thank you so much, Usha. And I love the way you talk about sort of using tech to take small to scale. I think that's really brilliant, actually. And I wanted to pick up actually on one of the things you mentioned there. One of the key questions is, are the public willing to pay more for sustainably produced food? And I wanted to bring in Suresh Motwani at this point from Solidaridad in India, where they've been working to support smallholder soya farmers to transition to regenerative agriculture as part of a global, actually, sustainable soy program. And one of the sort of challenges that Solidaridad note on the website is about the low demand for sustainably produced soy. So I wanted to ask you, Suresh, how can smallholder farmers make that transition if they're not going to get a fairer price? Or can we persuade and involve the buyers and the brands in helping make this transition more possible?
Yeah, actually, thank you very much. First of all, to inviting me for these discussions. I agree, there is a limited demand from the outside buyers for this sustainability produce. But it's about the question of the eco-environment. Basically, it's a question about how we are creating the ecosystems for these type of initiatives. The regenerative farming is not any newest idea or so. This is the old generation systems, practices in place. We need to be utilized in the modern era with the efficient scientific methodologies involved. So based on our experiences, businesses are not completely denied the regenerative farming system. They are interested. They are looking for the market case. They are looking for the financial feasibility. They are looking for the ecosystems around. If the consumers or the people's going to be demand these type of products farm under the ecological practices, the businesses are also agree with. Another point is about the regular sustainable supply chain. The sustainable farming system, sustainable supply chain, and regenerative agriculture is not going to be different itself. They are the mix with each other. When we talk about the regular sustainable supply chain of any commodity like soybean in our case, it's also the part of the sustainable farming systems where the processors also need the regular supply of the soybean. So it's part of the regenerative farming, where in case of the MP where we are working, more than 100 million hectare land are degraded. Farmers are not able to utilize perfectly. They are getting very low production from the per hectare land, and potential is huge. So it's due to the heavy use of the different chemicals, the modern era farming systems to utilize their land with the perfect chemical mixture also. So now the businesses are also understand basically if they want to be regular supply of their raw material, they have to push the regenerative farming systems activities. As a organizations, as a stakeholders, we really need to move forward to provide some real ecosystem and the business viability, the business case to businesses also. In this context, we are working with, and the prime important is to be provide the business case, the market sensitivity. So these 3-4 factors maybe work more. The businesses need to be invest more for the proper supply chain of this regenerative farming produce. We need to create some incentive systems. The farmers who are adopting the regenerative farming practices might be required to some additional support in case of the particular raw material input. Most of the raw input, basically in our case, we assume around 60 to 70% of the agriculture inputs. Farmers can be prepared their own. The regenerative agriculture all about the circular economy. The raw material they use can be ultimately used further and further to farm the produce from the particular area. Remaining 30% or 40% inputs, farmers, especially the smallholder farmers, they're really looking for the solutions. A lot of the people talking about to be adopt the 100%, for example, the organic input also. There is a lack of the availability in the market on the appropriate pricing. A lot of the companies are there, businesses are there, they demand the organically produced produce with the higher premium or the higher. So farmers are not able to invest in this segment. We need to be provide the appropriate scientific inputs with the lower cost. So farmers can be mobilized to produce their produce. And similarly, businesses, the governments also need to be initiated with the policy level. Yeah.
No, it's really interesting that point as well about the sort of the support farmers need. And I want to bring in our final panelist at this point, Nikki Yoxel, who I don't know how you have any time in the day, Nikki, given your number of different roles. Nikki is a cattle farmer in the northeast of Scotland, where she's practicing mob grazing. And I really hope next time we have a webinar, we'll have to go to Nikki's farm in order to see in reality what you're doing. But she's also worked with Pasture for Life and the UK Land Workers Alliance, and most recently Nature Friendly Farming Network. So welcome, Nikki. And you do talk about what a steep learning curve it's been moving to these new ways of doing regenerative agriculture. And so I wondered, what are the skills you think we need to nurture to enable people to make this shift? And whether, looking at the UK as an example, can scaling regenerative agriculture deliver the much needed rural jobs and livelihoods, which has obviously been a theme of what everyone's been talking about.
Thanks, Harriet. I'm just going to switch my camera off because I think my internet's struggling a little bit with all this bad weather we've had. So to answer your question, yeah, the skills aspect is really key. Our existing models of education and training really rely on this kind of post-industrial, technologically focused approach to learning that's very didactic, it's top down, it really does focus on technical application of knowledge. And what it doesn't do is develop these kind of more knowledge assimilation practices that are really key for regenerative and restorative futures. We really need to support farmers and those coming through education, young farmers and teenagers who are thinking about a career on the land, to really develop their collaboration skills, to develop the requirements of social learning practices, to learn how to develop and engage with communities of practice, and then to sort of assimilate and create synergies in their knowledge, which they can then apply to their own particular contexts. So this isn't about, for example, this is how you grow this crop. There might be multiple ways to grow that crop. And what we need to support people to do is learn all of those different approaches and then work out what's best for them at the place they are in their journey towards a regenerative future at that time. So creating support for adaptive learning opportunities, a growth mindset are really key in how we enable the skills transition to support this future. And in terms of scaling, this is very much about a bottom up, not a top down approach. And the Land Workers Alliance particularly would really support the idea of, more farmers, better food. If we get more people working on the land and we're putting more effort into producing better food across all of our food that's produced. We quite often hear the idea of less but better meat, but actually, thinking back to what Adele was saying about Patrick Holden, who set up Sustainable Food Trust, actually better food is just what we need to be thinking about. We need to be thinking about what the nutritional quality of the food is, how it's produced, but also the equitable access to jobs and how people are treated when they're growing food as well. So in terms of a shift within the UK, I think that there are significant changes that need to happen. One is addressing the price that we pay at the till. We have the third cheapest food in the world in the UK. And we do not value our food, and the amount of money as a proportion that we spend on food is significantly lower than most other countries with similar economic performance. So understanding the value of food and how we can help people to engage with that in a way that is meaningful for them in terms of a food culture and cooking, and understanding that this isn't just about farming, it's about food as well. And working across all of those different sectors to support that, I think, is going to be a way that we support that scaling up of regenerative agriculture and agroecology in the UK. We can't just expect farmers to carry all of the burden for this. This has to be much broader across society as a whole, for all of us who are eating food every day and have a role to play in this as consumers.
Thank you so much, Nikki. I'd love to discuss in more detail how do we enable people to pay more for their food, especially when they're feeling a crunch on cost of living. But let's hold that for a minute and go to some of the questions in the Q&A. And please do keep putting in your questions. Now, I know there's one about women from Rebecca that Noah has already answered, but I might come back to it after, because I'd love to also hear from other panelists. But we also have a question from Taimur Malik asking about what organic fertilizers, Noah, do you help farmers deploy? And do you see immediate positive results, or actually is there a yield decline first? And in that case, is it really hard to convince farmers to shift their mindsets? And does it really help to see positive best practice examples from other farmers? And although this was a question to Noah, and I'd love to hear about YICE Uganda, if any of the others of you have examples that you'd like to share to answer that question, I'd love to just pop your hand up and let me know. But Noah, over to you first.
Yeah, thank you so much. So basically, our goal is to try as much as possible to make sure that farmers are not paying a lot on their gardens. And so what we do is we do train farmers to use the locally organic materials like the natural shrubs, the green leaves, from their gardens to make the liquid organic fertilizers that we make as you see in the image. But also we introduce, we encourage farmers to use other organic materials such as manures, plant residues, and others on the gardens. And the goal is they should not spend a lot on organic fertilizers. And that's how we do it, and it has really worked out. And of course, for the first 6 months, probably, or let me say the first farming season, the yields are not all that good. And that's where we have the problem with the farmers, because they're like, oh, fine, I'm not applying this chemical fertilizer. I'm using organic, but it's not working out. So after 6 months, there is a big problem. The yields are not so all that good, but for the next round of planting and farming, the yields really continue to get better. And then it's sustainable because the farmers are not going to be worried about having to buy fertilizers every season like they do in the conventional farming methods. And of course, what we do to make sure that the farmers are not, they don't feel like it doesn't work out, in every farming community, set up a demo site or a learning center where we establish a regenerative farming garden and show them how it works. They come and learn, and then they go and adopt on their gardens. And yeah, about mindset shift. It's always not easy, as I mentioned. It takes some time, but we have always had a few farmers that join at the start. And then when others see things are working out, they also come in and join. I would give you an example. In one farming community that has around 100 farming households, we only had 14 farmers that joined our program when we introduced it to them. And we are so shocked that even the local leaders that introduced us in the community didn't want to join. And after like 6 months, things were working out. They all now started joining. And we are like, oh yeah, we told you that this works out. And they are now celebrating us introducing regenerative farming to them. Thank you.
Thanks, Noah. That's brilliant. And Suresh, you wanted to come in on this.
Yeah, I need to be add on this. Basically, we need to be differentiate the organic farming and the regenerative farming systems. Basically, we are talking about the middle part of the Buddha, where we need to be create our soil systems in the long-term sustainable way. It's not about to just to be use the organic fertilizer or input on the whole on the land or reduce or replace any chemical input also. It is about the middle part of Buddha, where we need to be add the more and more organic material in the soil to increase the richness of soil. Then farmers can be rely on these type of methodology for farming system. They can get their yield. So it's not only about to be create the whole conventional farming system into the organic farming system. It's about to be reorganize, regenerate the natural resources, provide them the technologies who can conserve their indigenous methodologies. And forever, we initiate the 2020 model in our farming systems, where we talk to farmers to reduce your 20% of the chemical input with the organic inputs. So slowly by 2 years, 3 years, they will get the more yield from the same farming systems with the regenerative practices. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And some of you might have seen in the chat, there's been a discussion going on between Janani and Adele and Tanya about that relationship between regenerative farming and organic, but that shift towards a biological method of production as being the key principle. I'd like to now bring in a question which actually sort of builds on that from Anton Rifford about the extent to which the principles of regenerative agriculture can be applied to cereals, which typically require larger crops and lands, as opposed to, for example, market gardens that might need smaller volumes. And so can we grow enough to feed the world? Now, I know Usha was starting. Oh, everybody wants to answer this one. Usha, you were starting to type in, so I'm going to come to you first, then I'll go Adele, Nikki, Suresh, and then we'll go to some of the other questions. Please keep your questions coming.
Sure, I think I'm sure all the other panelists are also going to point to studies that long-term studies that say that over a period of time, yields are actually better with regenerative organic. And I have a sort of our definition of regenerative agriculture is no chemicals, right? So it's because even a little use of chemicals kill the microbial activity in the soil. So for us, regenerative, we call regenerative as almost organic plus plus, because in addition to organic, you need to do local food systems, circular economies, zero waste, or use waste to wealth, as we say, use waste as an input for some other something on the farm. So one, I think with regenerative organic, we are not giving up yield, and two, we are not I think I think all of us can point to studies. We can feed the world with regenerative organic. That was what I was trying to type.
Thanks, Usha. And Adele, Nikki, Suresh, if you'd all like to unmute yourselves and then perhaps just go in that order, what you'd like to build on what Usha said.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, so
I'll just go to Adele first, if that's okay. Then Nikki, then you.
Yeah, just two very quick points. I think regenerative can be used very effectively on arable land, on land producing cereals. The key thing is thinking about how we can put the nutrients back into the soil in a natural way through rotations, and that has to really be done using sort of herbal lays, grass lays, and really for farmers to be able to produce food and sell something during that time that there's a fertility building phase. We have to be thinking about grazing livestock, and therefore grazing livestock, grass-fed livestock have to play a really, really important part of our food system going forward. And secondly, just to be a bit provocative, I think we can feed the world with regenerative agriculture, but I think we're producing probably too much grain at the moment, and that's largely because we're feeding over half the grain we grow to intensive livestock. And so I think we have to really think about scaling down intensive livestock production, which in turn will reduce the amount of grain we have to grow, which is good because obviously we have to grow everything as part of a rotation. So naturally, there's going to be some give and take.
Nikki, to you next, but I'd also like you to answer as we're with you, Rebecca's other question about companies buying up land in order to offset their carbon credits. So perhaps you could give a quick response to both.
Sure. I mean, I think in terms of can regen ag feed the world, I think I totally agree with what Adele and Usha have said already. But I think what's really important about regenerative agriculture is it is not a set of practices. And all too often we're hearing about regenerative practices, but actually regen ag is about a set of principles, and it's about a mindset, and it's about thinking of your management in alignment with those principles. And as with any set of principles, you can apply that at any scale. So that can apply to a one hectare market garden, or it can apply to thousands of hectares of upland moorland grazing in the north of Scotland where I live. So it can apply at any scale, in any context. And actually the important aspect is thinking about these principles and then aligning your farm practices with the principles. There is no kind of rule book that says doing this type of farming equals regenerative. It's about doing the right thing at the right time where you are on your regenerative journey, aligning with the principles, which are kind of quite well known. And I won't waste time now going into them because you've asked me to answer this other question in relation to land access. And I think there is a real risk of, particularly in the UK, that we're seeing this at the moment, and I can only really talk from a UK context, this idea of land grabs, if you like, by investors who are offsetting their polluting ways elsewhere and then buying upland areas to plant trees, accrue carbon credits, and continue to basically carry on with business as normal elsewhere. And I think one of the really strong things that anybody, regardless of where you're working or you're whether you're in agriculture or not, the things that we really need to be doing is kind of bringing that to the fore in terms of our lobbying work and how we bring that to the fore with politicians, to really challenge this idea that offsetting is not the path to net zero. And actually what we really need to be doing is reducing emissions. That's the first thing that has to happen. And so we need to continually keep the momentum in terms of that message and putting that pressure on our governments to understand that we cannot just offset by buying this land. So that's the first thing that we need to do. And secondly, I think, it's not access to land is an issue for new entrants, but 70% of the UK is being farmed at the moment. So there's a lot of farmers there already who have access to land, who could be transitioning towards regenerative approaches. And I think what's really important is how we build, as I mentioned earlier, these social networks and the support mechanisms to help farmers slightly start to change and make small little shifts in what they're doing and start understanding how to think regeneratively as opposed to how to farm regeneratively. And if we can shift our thinking, then some of those practices can follow. So yes, access to land is an issue, but really let's focus on changing mindsets first.
Thank you so much, Nikki, and I could see people nodding away with you. And thank you also for bringing up that point. We have to say at Ashden, don't talk about net zero, because this is some fallacy that the world is feeding itself, that you're somehow going to net off all your carbon emissions somewhere. Actually, it's about zero carbon, and it's about reaching zero carbon by 2030 if we're going to really prevent global warming, getting out of control and deepening the climate injustices, in particular for smallholder farmers. So I'd like now really to, I know Suresh and Noah, you wanted to come in on that question, but also to ask you if you could make any final comments that you'd like to make as we start to wrap up the webinar. So Suresh, over to you.
Yeah, it's very well explained, Father Nikki. When we talk about the regenerative farming system, it's not only about any commodity, cereal, fruits, or vegetables. It's about the farming system, circular economy. So it can be applied on the any scale, any commodity, on the any geography. It's about the principles in the local context. So this is the answer. I also see the one question about the sustainable farming systems and how differentiate with the regenerative farming system. Both are same. The sustainable farming system is all part of the regenerative farming systems. So it's all about the integrated our natural resources, conserve them in the longer term to be produced with the highest level, fulfill the requirement of the planet, peoples, lands. It's all to conserve our resources and fulfill our requirements with natural green environment. It's all about. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Suresh. Noah, I know you also had your hand up on that key question about can regenerative agriculture feed the world, and whether there were any other last thoughts you wanted to share.
Yeah, sure. Thank you so much. I think I just wanted to share an experience and a live one. I grew up on a coffee plantation where we never applied any chemicals, me and my mother. And for a long time, I think the plantation was doing well, and we are practicing the traditional or regenerative farming methods. No chemicals, not even when pesticides came, until we got a very serious pesticide and we are forced to buy chemicals. I don't remember the name of the chemicals. And then we are told for the chemical to work very well, you have to add fertilizers. Trust me, as I talk now, the coffee plantation is no more. It had been there. I grew up seeing it for a long time. Now, the question is, can regenerative farming feed the world? Yeah, like Uganda a few years ago was the food basket of the region in Africa, for example. Before we got all these chemicals introduced to us, the GMOs that we are discussing in Parliament of Uganda, before they came in, and there was a lot of food. There was a lot of food everywhere. Today, the food is reducing. People are spending a lot of money on chemicals. The soils are dilapidated. And the question actually would be, can the new methods of use of chemicals, is using chemicals going to feed the world sustainably? The answer is no. Regenerative farming will, and that's where we need to go. Yeah, and of course, the last thing, yeah, okay, thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Sorry, I know we need a lot longer for this, but I'm going to have to start to bring us to a close. Usha, one final thought from yourself?
I think all of us, like it or not, are part of a food system that we may or may not be fully aware of. I think in closing, what I would like all of us to become better at is to become conscious consumers of the food that you're eating, right? Where is it coming from? Who's actually farming? What system is it? What else is being used? What is being done to soil and animals and all the other ecosystem players whose health is going to decide how healthy we can be, right? I think the easier answer is to look for technocratic solutions, but as I mentioned earlier, technology can be a solution or can create more problems. We all have seen that already. So for us, I am advocating for all of us to become active consumers, not just go to your grocery store, pick up whatever is the cheapest or pick up whatever you think, just become active. That's my sort of last thought.
Thank you, Usha. And I should say in the UK, it's actually Fair Trade Fortnight at the moment, exactly about putting the spotlight on ensuring farmers internationally get access to a fair price. Adele, one last thought from
yeah, really quick thought is I think between, you know, this panel, between all farmers actually across the globe, I think we have the puzzle pieces for this solution. I think we have to work together. We have to showcase what good, you know, what success looks like. So Noah, Nikki, Usha, all the things you've been talking about, we have to tell these stories and work together to find the solution, because there's a big transition that needs to take place.
Thank you so much, Adele. And I love the way, I think it was you who said we have to sell the story as well as the food. And I would like to really thank this incredible panel who have told such inspiring stories and have also answered many questions. And I know I see more and more questions coming in, and I have my whole list, but we didn't even get near. But we're just beginning this discussion all together. And I would like to really thank the whole panel, and also to thank all the participants for coming along. And I guess that's the key sort of takeaway, is what can we do next? And it obviously is about becoming active consumers and active citizens in really trying to raise awareness about regenerative agriculture through the different ways we all have, whether it's funding and supporting frontline organisations such as some of those on the panel today, whether it's about raising awareness through social media or through blogs, or whether it's pushing for those policy changes that Nikki was also starting to hint towards, and in particular in the run-up now to COP27, where we're really hoping there will be more of a spotlight on food and farming, as well as on access to energy. There's so much for us to do, and one very concrete thing where I hope you will join us in Ashden is helping us find the winners of our 2021 awards, including on energising agriculture, which is one of the focuses. We've got 3 international awards next year, but one of them is focusing on energy access and energising agriculture, and you may have seen the link in the chat. And what we're looking for this year are organisations who are working both about access to energy and about agriculture. So it might be, for example, using solar or using wind to improve yields, or for post-harvest, or for cold chain, or for processing. So there's more details on our website, and I hope you will all join us in spreading the word about that award. And in general about the work that we're seeking to do at Ashden, with the real focus on the skills we need if we're going to make the transition to a low carbon society and a low carbon economy, and ensure that people get better livelihoods and access to those green jobs as we make that transition, and that we make sure it is really a just and a fair transition that works, including for the smallholder farmers who've been so much a focus of our discussion today. And so finally, to thank again DOEN and the Tellus Mater Foundation for supporting this work, and our wonderful panelists. Thank you very much, everybody, and have a good evening, afternoon, morning.